Breaking news here live on the field of 68. Illinois transfer Coleman Hawkins announced this morning that he is going to be committing to Kansas State to play his final season of college basketball. He is going there for what Shams Charania is reporting is nearly $2 million. It's the second time that we've heard that $2 million number for a transfer in this transfer window. And it is the second time that we've heard this is the biggest NIL package that has ever been offered to anybody. I have no idea if any of this stuff is true. There's no way to determine if this stuff is accurate. It's only what we hear from the people that are making these deals. But I will tell you this, Goodman, money aside, Jerome Tang going out and landing Coleman Hawkins after getting Ugonna Onyenso, after getting Okoro Okoro, after getting Doug McDaniel, after bringing in a whole bunch of shooters, all of a sudden, this Kansas State team looks really, really scary. What do you know about Coleman's commitment, and what do you make of Kansas State today after they have landed arguably the best transfer left on the market?
Yeah, I mean, this was interesting because obviously his situation was a little bit different. And I think it honestly might be a learning point for some other guys that go through the draft process is pick a school first in a way, because there weren't a ton of suitors because a lot of the schools had already either filled their rosters or utilized their budgets, their NIL budgets. So it wasn't like he had as many schools as I thought there'd be, or maybe he thought there'd be. But it kind of came down to he visited Kansas State last week. LSU was in the mix. SMU was in the mix. Georgetown was kind of in the mix late, and he was thinking about visiting there. But ultimately, it was a combination of the opportunity to play for a winning program, for a program that 2 years ago, look at the success they had last year, didn't make the NCAA tournament, but the roster around him. The biggest thing on his visit, Rob, was he wanted to figure out, like, where did he fit in? Because they've got some bigs, like we talked about, Bay Fall, Onyenso coming in, Okoro Okoro. So they got some 4s and 5s. He wanted to see where he fit in, and part of where he fits in, according to Jerome Tang's plan, is playing some 3 and getting his knee healthy. You know, getting his knee healthy so he can guard, because if he's 100%, I mean, imagine that front line. I'm not saying he's going to play 35 minutes at the 3, but I think he can give you 10, 12, 15 minutes, maybe at the 3. And who knows how Bay Fall and Onyenso develop. It could be a situation where, honestly, the 4 and 5 is Okoro Okoro and Coleman Hawkins, you know, and who knows. But Jerome Tang has some flexibility. He's got 4 talented dudes to split time between the 4, 5, and if Hawkins can play the 3.
Yeah, and you know, I think the other important thing to note is that Coleman Hawkins is known as an initiator and a versatile guy, right? Like, that's kind of the value of him is not necessarily the numbers that he put up. Like, if you're just looking on paper, you average 12.6 boards, just under 3 assists, steal and a half. Like, that's not necessarily what makes you this valuable as a player, right? What makes him valuable is he's really switchable defensively. What makes him valuable is he could step out and knock down threes, while also being a guy that can be something of an initiator on the offensive end of the floor and a creator on the offensive end of the floor. Like, he could be your offensive hub while also being one of your better defenders, and can allow you to play, if you want to, Hawkins anywhere from pretty much like point forward to the center spot, and not really.
He makes him a top 25 team, Rob. That's what
easily,
Coleman Hawkins.
Easily.
Well, beforehand, yes. Beforehand, I think they were a fringe top 25 team. And I'm not even sure I would have put them there. I didn't, and I probably wouldn't. For me, they would have been like 30 to 40. Now, you're right. I mean, if the pieces fit, and again, a lot of it's going to depend on Doug McDaniel. Is he a point guard for a winning team, right? Like, that's a big question mark. Can he do it, be the guy for a winning team? Same thing with Brendan Howson. You know, obviously he can make shots. He played a bit part, honestly, for a team that didn't do so well last year. So,
but you know what he does? You know what he does?
He makes shots. He shoots
it.
Yeah.
Max Jones last year at Cal State Fullerton shot 39% from 3 while taking 4.5 threes per game.
But how many times have you seen, or I seen Max Jones play? 0.
CJ Jones last year
0.
at
0.
Illinois Chicago.
But again, we don't know how those guys are going to translate.
That's fine, but they don't have to do much. You know what they got to do?
Correct. Be
They got to
pieces.
stand out there and they got to knock down threes. So you added Max Jones, you added CJ Jones, you added Brendan Housen, 3 guys who in their college careers have proven to be able to stand outside and knock down threes, right? You have David Gasson, right, who was still there, who shot 50% from 3 2 years ago. He didn't really shoot all that well last year, but he shot 50% from 3 2 years ago. Coleman Hawkins is coming in, shot 37% from 3 on more than 4.5 threes per game this past year. You have a guy like Ugana and Yensu who is going to be a rim running lob threat. You could say the same thing about Bay Fall. You can probably say the same thing about a core. You have a point guard who wants to be able to get put in ball screens, have space around him, get into the lane, and find somebody open, whether that's a shooter on the strong side of the floor, a guy in the weak side corner, the lob to the rim. Like the way that he's built this team is so similar to the way that he built that team that had Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. Now, we don't know.
More around him. They got more around him.
Yeah, but we don't know.
It's a deeper team.
Marquise Noel was an All-American player, right? He was arguably the best point guard in college basketball the year that he was in college basketball. Keontae Johnson was a pro, right? He was a pro. And we don't know if Coleman Hawkins is going to live up to what Keontae Johnson was. We don't know if Doug McDaniel is going to be as good as Marquise Noel was. But if you look at what Jerome Tang was trying to do when he built this roster, I get it. I see it. I'm in on it, and I'm willing to bet on Jerome Tang finding a way to make this group work. I think they're a top 20 team. I think that they are. All right, so we talked about the Big 12 a couple of weeks ago, right? Kansas, Baylor, Houston, to me, are that top tier.
Iowa State.
Yeah, Iowa State. Sorry, I forgot about Iowa State. You're right. Iowa State, you got that top tier right there. And then I think you have Arizona. And once you get past that, give me Texas Tech and Kansas State. I think are both going to be like top 15, top 20 teams. I'm willing to bet on those 2 guys because I like the roster, and I'm willing to bet on the coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm with you here, and I think it's a good fit personality-wise to Coleman Hawkins and Jerome Tang, right? Both are high energy. Again, I've said this, like Coleman Hawkins, and we did something, I don't know, a month ago at length where I talked to him and asked him about kind of, honestly, the perception of Coleman Hawkins out there because of sometimes how he acts on the court. This is as smart a kid as I've ever been around. I mean that sincerely. Like he may need to tone it down at times on the court, but I think Jerome Tang is going to let Coleman Hawkins be Coleman Hawkins for the most part. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for college basketball. We need personalities. Coleman's got that. And again, the biggest thing for me is how they attack his knee in the offseason here. Can they get him back to what he was defensively 2 years ago when he was at 100%? We saw probably a 75% Coleman Hawkins this year for the most part. And again, he doesn't need to go out and average 20 a game for this team, but I think he can be that guy who just plugs a lot of gaps with his team. And one of them is coming off an Elite 8 year, winning at the highest level. A core just obviously they went to the NCAA tournament at Samford, and I saw that SoCon title game. So you are mixing in some guys who come from winning programs, winning situations, with a couple guys that did not.
Yeah. I will also say, and it's the elephant in the room, that Kansas versus Kansas State, the Sunflower Showdown this year.
We got to go again.
Well, look, I think that the one game that I want to be at this year is Coach Cal returning to Lexington, right? And I think not all that far behind is Coleman Hawkins and Kansas State facing off with Hunter Dickinson and Kansas. 2 guys.
Do they like each other? Do we know? Do they like each other?
I think they do, because
I do too.
To a point, like I think there's a mutual level of respect in terms of both their basketball abilities and their shit talking abilities online. Like I think they both understand and appreciate, like, hey, we're the 2 best in the country when it comes to finding a way to shit post our way into something on X, on Instagram.
Listen, the best nickname, nickname in the country is Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah, yes, dude. They're so, like, I cannot wait for this. And I don't know if you saw it, but when Coleman was on his visit to Kansas State, he posted something about like the emoji with the red dot, like saying that he was in like I'm in Manhattan or whatever, right? Manhattan Brewing Company, by the way, that might be one of the sponsors that got Coleman Hawkins his $2 million. But when he posted that he was on the visit, Hunter quote tweeted it and said, "You're only 2 hours away from the only real campus in Kansas," or something like that. So
no, it's going to be
I
elite.
cannot wait.
We got to get them both on. That's my goal. We got to get them both on in an off-season pod with the two of them talking trash to each other. It can be like one of those, like going back at it with one another.
Hey, look, it's going to be two masters of their crafts, and, and I cannot wait for when they actually play each other.
What this also signifies, Rob, what this also signifies, if we didn't already know it, is Kansas State is a player among the biggest players in NIL currently in college basketball, right? I mean, you look at their payroll, and it probably stacks up to just about anybody in the country right now, maybe even Arkansas included. How about that? Who would have thought?
Well, I think, and you probably have a little bit of better insight into this than I do, but I think part of that is when you have some of the jobs come open that came open this year, right? And we saw it a little bit with Baylor. We saw it with Ole Miss. When you have Kentucky open up, when you have Arkansas open up, when you have Louisville open up, and you have coaches that are in the mix there, part of the way that you are able to get that coach to stay is not just giving them a raise, it's finding a way to put a little bit of more money into that NIL budget. And I think that one of the reasons why the transfer market went as nuts as it did this year, why you saw some of the numbers pop up, is because you had these guys that were like, well, I could leave and go to this job, or I could come back because they just pumped 30% more into the NIL budget that I have, and now I can afford two players that are this good instead of just one player that is this good. And that's to say nothing of the fact that Kentucky is always going to have that money there, and Louisville's always going to have that money there, and now UConn's going to have that money there, and Arkansas is going to have that money there. So all of a sudden, instead of having like 1, 2, 3 teams that could afford to spend 7 figures on a player, like you got like 15 or 20 probably that if they need to can actually get to that number from, and probably from more than one guy for a lot of these teams. So I think that my crazy, I feel like that played a role in how this all kind of played out this year for the guys that are
Tang, well, and again, you have these schools, the big ones were who? I mean, Arkansas, because Cal got the job. You have Ole Miss. Well, Beard kind of leveraged, obviously, some NIL when he was in the mix at Arkansas. Tang, his name, he was in the mix at Arkansas as well, so I'm sure he got leverage there. Mark Pope certainly got Louisville. Kelsey, new coach at Louisville. They upped it. Obviously, they weren't giving a dime to Kenny Payne. By the way, did you watch Kenny Payne's video?
Yes, I did.
Like I love.
We don't need to turn
Kenny.
this.
I know this isn't the time, but like, how delusional? How delusional? Like, come on, man. Like, dude, you weren't good. Just accept it, own it. Don't make excuses. You weren't
Kenny live,
good.
man. Let Kenny live. Let Kenny live.
Just frustrates me. A lot frustrates me. One thing that doesn't is, again, 2 years ago when we went to that game in Manhattan, Kansas State, it was one of the best atmospheres, one of the best games I've been to probably in the last decade or so. And we're going to get hopefully something like that again this year with 2 great trash talkers, 2 really good players. And I think the Coleman Hawkins addition by Kansas State was as big as almost any in the country. Like, again, I got to go through it and make sure. And again, for me, a lot of it's still going to be Coleman Hawkins' health. But I just think what Coleman Hawkins does on both ends of the court, like, is really understated. That's what I will say is when he's healthy, what he can be defensively. And that's the part is he's such a versatile all-around player. And I think Jerome Tang's going to give him the green light to go out there and shoot, 6 threes a game, no problem.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, and he kind of solved this problem last year to a point, but it's leveling out the highs and the lows. Like
Sure.
when Coleman, the best version of Coleman Hawkins is, as I think you can make the argument, is going to be as good as anybody in college basketball next year, right? Maybe not better than everyone, but as good as anyone in college basketball this year. But he's not at that level every single game. Like, there are still games where he, and maybe it has to do with the injury, but there's a level of inconsistency there that I think once you iron that out, he is a guy, his value. It's similar. We had this conversation the other day with Cooper Flagg, right? And I don't know if we had it. I can't remember if we had it public, like on the show, if we were talking offline. But part of what will make Cooper Flagg really good is what he can do to impact winning without putting up like these massive numbers. And I think that Coleman Hawkins at his best, his value is impacting winning without having it be something where you go get 33 points or you do something like Hunter Dickinson does and get like 20 and 20 in the Champions Classic, right? Like the stuff that he does well doesn't necessarily pop in the box score, but when he's playing his best, you can just see that that team is better. So I think that look, they needed this addition. I think the best part about it is that he's not going to be relied upon to do everything this year. I think part of what made him so effective last year is that you had Terrence Shannon right there next to him, being able to, take over some of the scoring load. I think Doug McDaniel will be able to handle a lot of that scoring load. And I love the build of this Kansas State roster. I'm in. Tang, I'm in. Invite us back. And you know what I'm going to need? I'm going to need to get a bigger hat because this thing doesn't really fit on my head. I got a big old noggin, man. This thing doesn't really fit on my head all that.
My hat fits well. My hat fits well. And when we go there, my guess is Coleman Hawkins is going to have a few more deals than you have.
maybe not, but I promise you I will
do
more damage.
I bet you he can get you a hat easier than Tang can right now.
Yeah, probably. I could do more damage at the Manhattan Brewing Company than he can. I promise you that much. Listen, this has been the Field of 68 After Dark live breaking news. Coleman Hawkins to Kansas State, and the Wildcats now officially, in my mind, a top 20 team in college basketball next.